Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzhak Ruvin speaking to you from south of Jerusalem here in the holy land of Israel, the holy, beautiful land of Israel. Today is the 29th and final day of the month of ER 5785. This evening meaning Tuesday evening, we begin Rosh Chodesh Sivan, the new month of Sivan, which is the third month of the Hebrew calendar year and the month of Shavuot, the celebration of Shavuot, which is on the sixth day of Sivan. That is actually next Sunday evening, Monday. And of course, Shavuot celebrates both the first fruit offerings, which were brought to the altar in the holy temple by every Israelite who had first fruits growing on their land. And of course, it's also the anniversary of the receiving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, Har Sinai, in the wilderness, which we read about some weeks, even some months ago. And this week, we are beginning the fourth of the 5 books of the Torah, the book of Bamidbar, Numbers, it's called in English. It's called Numbers because of the many censuses that are taken in the book of Numbers. In fact, it also has a nickname given to it by the rabbis for the same reason, which is Torat Pekudim, I think it's called, because the Pekud is also a census, a numbering of the people. But in Hebrew it's Bamidbar, which simply means wilderness, because it is the fourth word and the first significant word of the first pasuk, the first verse of the book of Bamidbar, which is how the different Torah reading sections are named, after the first word or the first significant word of the Torah reading. And this brings us to a whole new place in our journey through time, beginning with Genesis and through space, beginning with the Exodus from Egypt, way back in the book of Exodus. And yet we're sort of still in the same place that we've been since the conclusion of the book of Exodus. We're still, since the conclusion of the book of Exodus, we're still at Mount Sinai. The Israelite encampment is still at Mount Sinai, and it's actually still the as we'll read very soon, it's still the first day of the second month in the second year after the Exodus from Egypt, meaning that the book of Leviticus began really on the first day of the first month of the second year. And so now we're 1 month later. Okay, we're first of the second month in the second year. So a month has passed. Much of the book of Leviticus did not cover the story of the people on their journey from Egypt through the wilderness to the land of Israel, land of Canaan, but focused on the offerings and the work of the Kohanim, the temple priests in the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and of course all things related to Kedusha, to holiness, and to Tahara, purity, ritual purity. And again, as we noted in the past few weeks, it kind of expanded into all different kinds of themes, including the last week was a focus on the Shemitah, the sabbatical year, and the Yovel, the Jubilee year, commandments that are very, very connected to the land of Israel. And it's no wonder. Also mentioned were the holidays, the festivals that take place in the land of Israel. And it's hardly a surprise because Israel is gearing up to go into the land of Israel. They're ready to go. They left Egypt, they received the Torah, they built the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and all that awaits them now is to enter into and conquer and take control of the land of Canaan. And and turn it into the land of Israel. And of course, spoiler alert right now, we're going to find out here in the book of Bamidbar that things didn't go as hoped for. Once Israel accomplished all these things and set out on its journey toward the land, and of course, without giving too much information, a colossal breakdown of national nerve and belief and faith in Hashem and trust in Hashem occurred at a certain point, which postponed Israel's eventual entry into the land of Israel by some 39 years. But right now, the entire encampment is anticipating entering very soon, and for that reason, some very practical steps are taken right at the beginning of the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, and in our very Torah reading, and that is censuses are taken of all the men 20 years and older of all the 12 tribes, excluding the tribe of the Levites, of Levi, for the purpose of forming an army. And this tells us a few things. First of all, as delightful as life was in the wilderness, and as we'll use the word magical, as it must have felt. Every morning you get up and you have the manna outside your door, and the cloud of glory is guarding over the encampment, and you have the Mishkan in the middle, and miracles are happening, and it's very, very wonderful, almost a supernatural existence, yet very practical measures must be made for the anticipated entry into the land, and perhaps also for the purpose of self-defense while going through the wilderness, as we'll discover later on in the closing chapters, really, of the book of Numbers, when Israel does encounter hostile nations on their way into Canaan, and they need to fight them. So, for all the since the reliance on miracles, we are told never to rely on miracles, but for all the blessings that Israel received while in the wilderness, and the miracles that Hashem did perform on Israel's behalf, Israel made haste under God's command to form an army for every man who actually, the wording is, I believe, let me look at it right now, every man who was able to bear arms. No exemptions, except for the tribe of Levi, who, of course, the Kohanim were part of the tribe of Levi, and their encampment was right next to the Mishkan, to the Tabernacle, and their sacred mission was to guard over the Tabernacle. That was their part in the defense. I guess you could call them the domestic front. What's the word? There's a word for it that's used all the time. But they were there to guard over and protect the Tabernacle, and as we'll learn later in the Parsha, also to tend to it, to each family of the sons of Levi. Each family had different assignments for tending to the tabernacle and to the vessels within the tabernacle, for disassembling the tabernacle and carrying the vessels on the tabernacle through the wilderness when it was time to move, and of course for reassembling when it was time to set up camp again. And but the other 12 tribes, with 3 on each side, there's a square really formed around the tabernacle, and to the north and to the south and to the west and to the east were 3 tribes on either side, and those 3 tribes were formed a single military unit, and each of the tribes, as we read in Bamidbar, had a flag, a degel, and This is the first time that such a thing is mentioned, and it's clearly in association with the fact that they're forming an army. And as we know, to this very day, every unit in an army has its own flag for identification, and I suppose less so in this day, but certainly in those days for identification in the field, and especially when there was an actual battle and you needed to know where your fellow soldiers are, your fellow troops are. Those banners held up high in the air were essential for identification. They didn't have walkie-talkies, and they didn't have smartphones, and they didn't have computerized systems. They had those flags. So the flags were very essential for the proper maneuvering of the army that is being formed. Let's read the first few verses in Hebrew, then in English, and we'll talk more about Bamidbar. I also want a lot to cover today, because we do want to mention, also want to talk about the Yom Yerushalayim, Jerusalem Day, which occurred yesterday, and also, of course, speak a little bit about Shavuot, which is next Sunday evening, Monday. So let's start with these first few verses in the book of Numbers, chapter 1, verse 1. וידבר השם אל משה במדבר סיני באוהל מועד באחד לחודש השני בשנה השנית לצאתם מארץ מצרים לאמור שאו את ראש כל עדת בני ישראל למשפחותם לבית אבותם במספר שמות כל זכר לגולגולותם מבין 20 שנה ומעלה כל יוצא צבא בישראל תפקדו אותם לצבאותם אתה ואהרון. Hashem spoke to Moshe in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting on the first of the second month in the second year after their exodus from the land of Egypt, saying, take a census of the entire assembly of the children of Israel according to their families, according to their fathers' households, by number of the names, every male according to their head count, from 20 years of age and up, everyone who goes out to the legion, to the army, really. Tzavaot is army. Tzava is army in modern Hebrew. And Sivaot is the word being used here. Who goes out to the army in Israel, you shall count them according to their legions, you and Aharon. And with you shall be one man from each tribe, a man who is a leader of his father's household. And then it goes on to list the 12 tribes and give the count, the number of males from age 20 and up in each tribe. And then it goes on to say where they are situated on either of the 4 flanks of the tabernacle of the encampment around Mount Sinai. And after that, it will say how they move in formation when they strike camp and set out to move toward the land of Israel, which tribes lead the way, which go next, and it's all east, west, north, or south. And that's how they move. So they created this military formation, which basically protects and defends the entire nation. It's a people's army, much like the army of Israel today. And today we have many tens of thousands of soldiers in active duty. The vast majority right now are in Gaza, and they're not only the soldiers, the young soldiers who are doing their 3-year army service, but many reserve soldiers, many reserve soldiers many of them have been away from their homes, from their families, for months at a time. This is by far Israel's longest war in our modern history, putting a tremendous strain on families, on businesses, and we salute our soldiers who, despite it all, are still out there in the front lines and giving it their all, and slowly but surely taking apart Hamas, and God willing, marching toward a total victory over Hamas and a complete change in the situation in Gaza. I'm hoping that Israel will take control of Gaza, certainly security-wise, and I certainly hope that Jews will be invited once again to settle in Gaza. That's how you hold on to the land, and that's how you defend the land. Just as at the encampment here at Sinai, the people lived where they needed to defend. There was no empty territory that an army would go out to defend. You have to live there. You have to be there. Otherwise, what's the point? Another thing I'd like to mention, I'd like to really, dedicate this show to our soldiers, because so much of Parshat Bamidbar is about the soldiers, about the army. And yes, it is a commandment, Hashem, direct commandment to Moshe and to Aharon, create an army. And again, no exceptions, with the exception of the Levites, who had their own very important task, which was also part of the defense effort. Something very fascinating about the flags, and the flags are mentioned in a few places. I think the word degel, which is flag, is mentioned 14 times in the parsha. Once, of course, for each of the 12 tribes, and then 2 other times introducing, and I think maybe as a sikum, as a conclusion of the whole study of or mention of the flags, so the setting up of the army. And they were told by our tradition, by our midrash, that each of the flags related to a particular stone in the Choshen, in the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, of the high priest, who, of course, was the closest of all the Kohanim. He was the closest in proximity, physical proximity, I would say, to Hashem. He was the only one who would ever enter into the Holy of Holies. And of course, as we know, he bore the names of all the sons of Yaakov, the 12 tribes of Israel, on the breastplate, and also on the shoham, on the onyx stones on his shoulders. And he bore those names in order to remind him that he was acting on behalf of the entire nation of Israel, and that he was literally carrying and bearing their names and their standing, let's say, before Hashem, upon his heart and on his shoulders. So when the Temple Institute began our study, in order to determine the actual identity of the 12 stones, they're given names in Hebrew, of course, in the Torah. We've been through that, we've read that. And however, when trying to really determine which name refers to what stone, we discovered that in different time periods, different stones, the same stones may be given a different name, and certainly with Targumim, with translations of the Torah into Aramaic and other languages, those stones are also given other names. And stones, precious things in ancient times, which were traded from nation to nation over vast expanses of territory, from the Far East into the Middle East, and farther into Africa, and even into the whole Mediterranean basin at the time. Things like spices and stones, precious stones, and other things of commerce and of value were given different names by different nations, and sometimes even the same name. Sometimes a certain name sort of became the generic name for a particular fabric, even, or stone, or spice, or even fruit or vegetable that was traded. And in fact, some of the names we use today, even in English, if you study them, you'll find out that they came from a different language, and then if you might find that language, it might have been Greek, and that Greek name had something in common with a different language. Point is that in order to really ascertain with certainty the identity of the 12 stones, it was a tremendous challenge. But we have this midrash, which kind of just gives it all away. And it's a midrash from Bamidbar Rabbah, and let's just read it very quickly with the insignias. With the insignias, meaning with the banners. There were insignias for each and every prince. A banner with a color for each, and every banner like the color of the gems that were in Aharon's heart, from which the empire, I'm not really just reading a translation, I'm not really sure what's that translating, learned to make a banner with colors from each and every banner. For each and every tribe, the prince's banner was like the color of his stone. Reuven, its stone was a ruby, and its banner was dyed red, and mandrakes were depicted on it. The mandrakes, because of course Reuven collected mandrakes for his mother. Shimon, its stone was a peridot, its banner was dyed green, and Shechem was depicted on it because of the war that he fought in Shechem. And so on and so forth. I'm not going to read the whole list, but besides the picture depicted on the stones, on the flags, the colors that they're describing are the very colors of the stones that they're associated with on the Choshen, on the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, on the breastplate of Aharon. So what I want to make of this is this. Yes, this helps us to identify precisely what stone each of the 12 stones, but also I think there's a much deeper message. We started out talking about these flags were for the sake of the army, for identifying different parts of the army when in the field. And the menfolk were all enlisted in the army. And the army is out there, just like today, and I really want to relate it to today. Our army is out there defending the lives of all of us, defending our lives, defending our way of life, defending our land, defending Jerusalem, defending the Torah, defending the honor of the God of Israel. And they're out, and just like in the encampment, they were all at the perimeter of the encampment. They were the farthest away physically. They were the farthest away from the Mishkan, from the heart of the nation, and from the Holy of Holies, and from the whole holy tabernacle. They were the farthest away physically, yet their names, and I would go so far as to say that every name of every soldier is etched onto those stones, that each have the name of the 12 tribes that are on the breastplate of Aharon, that lie upon his heart when he does the service in the tabernacle, in the holy temple. And so these soldiers who are risking and willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of the nation, and for the sake of the people, and for the sake of the land, and for the sake of the honor of God, they are the furthest away, and yet they're the closest to the holy service in the tabernacle. Are you understanding what I'm trying to say here? That connection between the flags, which on the one hand has simply a very utilitarian purpose for military purposes, yet it connects the army and all its soldiers to the breastplate of the one person who is assigned to represent all of us before Hashem in the temple. And I just think that is, if you think about that, it's an amazing concept, and it just makes my appreciation of our soldiers so much deeper. And it also tells me that they're closest to God. They're closest to God because their names are etched into and illuminated on the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol. And today, of course, we don't have a Kohen Gadol, so I would say it's really incumbent upon all of us to pick up the slack and really bear the names of all our soldiers, those who have fallen, and those who are still fighting, and to keep them upon our hearts and in our prayers. And I know that we in Israel, we do that certainly in synagogues and at every public event. You will hear the prayer for the safety and for the success of our soldiers, as well as for the hostages who are still being held. And it's very, very personal here. And I just wanted to point out that the Parsha itself and the whole way that the army was set up, and this connection between the flags and the stones and the soldiers and the names, really, it's nothing new here in Israel, that it's so deeply personal. It's nothing new. Later on in the Parsha, we learn how the division of labor amongst the Levites, who will do what when it comes to transporting the tabernacle. So basically, we are ready to roll here and march on into Israel, and that's what the opening chapters and the opening verses of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, are all about. I just want to mention yesterday, Yom Yerushalayim, Jerusalem Day, was amazing day. We've posted many things from the Temple Mount and also from the Western Wall and from Jerusalem. The celebration, the love of the people of Israel for the city of Jerusalem is just overwhelming, and you see that, I think, in the few videos that we posted. There's so much more if you're searching online for things, but the tens of thousands of people who are in Jerusalem or at the Western Wall singing, celebrating, dancing with flags, and for the more than 2,000 Jews that went up to the Temple Mount, where they prayed and sang and waved flags. And also for the first time that I wasn't up there yesterday, but I saw photos for the first time of Jews wearing a talit and tefillin on the Temple Mount, something which has not been allowed up till now. And I saw photos, and from what I understand, these people were not harassed for doing it. So things are changing, and changing pretty rapidly on the Temple Mount. In fact, I read an article yesterday, which I will be posting on our Facebook page, of this discussion now amongst rabbis. Should the preferred place of prayer for Jews be the Temple Mount or the Western Wall? And of course, until recently, of course, the vast majority, and probably still today, the vast majority of rabbis in Israel will say the Western Wall. But they interviewed a few rabbis, including Rabbi Yisrael Ariel, the founder and head of the Temple Institute, who was the only rabbi of the half dozen that they interviewed who unequivocally said the Temple Mount should be the preferred place of prayer. And but I want to just mention quickly that the rabbis who said no, the Western Wall, there was no halachic reasoning for it. They just felt uncomfortable. Some of them just said, I feel uncomfortable going onto the Temple Mount. And one, in fact, Rabbi David Stav, who's a very important rabbi here in Israel, leads the Zohar, Institute movement, I'm not sure, but very modern and open Orthodox Judaism. What he said I found very disturbing, because he said, he said the nation has to be pure. We read in the Psalms that who goes up to the Temple Mount, to those who are pure of heart. He said, we're not ready yet. We need to be pure. We need to be united. He said, for building the temple. So hold on a second. I say, first of all, we're not talking about building a temple. We're talking about Jewish presence on the Temple Mount, which has to come before you build the temple. Secondly, I want to point out that we just read a few months ago in the book of Exodus, after the receiving of Torah, 39 days later, the Jews were worshiping and dancing around the golden calf. And then within months after that, we're building the tabernacle. Moshe didn't raise his hands and say, well, these people, they just sinned so badly, they're not ready for building the tabernacle. No. They just went right into it. And that's what united them. That's what made them pure of heart. That they had this mission, that they had this task, this national task to do something amazing, to do something for Hashem, who said, Asuli Mikdash, make for me a sanctuary. That's what raised and lifted the people up. That's what brought them together. That's what united them. So I think the thinking of this particular rabbi and many others is just backwards. We can wait forever for everyone to get on board and for everyone to be pure of heart. There's always going to be an excuse. There's always going to be, well, we're not quite there yet. Again, in the wilderness, when Israel was at its nadir, it was at the lowest of low points. Moshe said, let's do it. God said, let's do it. Moshe said, let's do it. And they did it. And it raised them up. And you know what? After that, they would also have their yuridot. They would also have their downturns. But it didn't take away from what they had done. And it didn't take away from the holiness of the tabernacle that they built in the wilderness, or later on, of course, the holy temple. So yes, I reject that line of thought, that way of thinking. And yeah, we have to get more people on board, that's for sure. But the idea is for the leaders, for the rabbis, to be the ones to be encouraging the people to going up to the Temple Mount and getting ready to build the Holy Temple. And that's what's going to inspire the people. Not saying, well, we're not ready yet. Okay, enough about that. Just a few words, because we really only have a couple of minutes left, about next week's Shavuot. Of course, we are today. I didn't announce it yet. Let me announce it right now. Today is 44 days, which are 6 weeks and 2 days of the Omer, meaning we have 5 more days of counting after today, and then the 50th day, which of course is Shavuot. And Shavuot has 2 sides to it. One is that it is the festival of the first fruits, where people begin to bring their first fruits, the produce that they're growing in the land of Israel. And of course you have all summer long to bring the first fruits, because not everything is ripe and ready to be brought right now. So it's just the beginning of that season. It's also the festival of the wheat harvest, when the wheat is just being harvested now. The Passover was the time of the barley harvest. This is the time of the wheat harvest. And of course, only 2 loaves of leavened bread, which are ever offered in the temple, are offered on Shavuot. And of course, the other aspect of Shavuot, which is not mentioned at all in the Torah, but it's part of the oral Torah, part of the tradition. The oral tradition is that Shavuot is also the anniversary of the receiving of a Torah at Mount Sinai. And so on Shavuot, many people stay up all night studying the Torah. And there's all sorts of traditions that center around the study of Torah. And it's a one-day holiday. But since it's just a one-day holiday, as opposed to the other 2 pilgrimage festivals, Sukkot and Pesach, it was in temple times, it was really too much to expect everyone to arrive with their offerings on that very one day of Shavuot. So actually for 7 full days, the temple was receiving people's offerings. So even though it only had one holy day as a day where there was no work was done, and certain offerings were made, for these 6 days following as well, people could bring up their first fruit offerings. And we're about to, here it is now, I'm hearing the music. So I just want to wish everybody a very, very happy Shavuot. We'll be back on Temple Talk right after Shavuot next week. Wishing everybody a Chag Shavuot Sameach, and hope you enjoyed being with me today. Thank you so much. Temple Talk.